Welcome to another episode of the Make Mental Health Matter show. I am Kelly Melissa Reinhart. I am your host, and that was kind of funny. If you have been watching this show for a little while, my intro was all like backwards. There's some new features on this platform that I use, and apparently I didn't know how to use them today. It's fine, right? As I say often, is that this is not about perfection. It's really about getting the information out and making sure that we're having the hard conversations or the challenging conversations that nobody else wants to. And my guest, as I have been for most of my guests that come on, I am very excited because he is going to share his journey, and we are probably going to have some of those tougher conversations, but really leading into this place of hope. You probably have noticed that most of my guests, they really have a story. There's a reason why they do what they do, or they have had a career that led them into this place that they had to make a change. They had to really reevaluate what was going on in their life and make a shift for their own mental health, their own wellness. And which ultimately leads them into the place or the space of what they're doing today. If you happen to be joining us for the very first time, thank you so much for watching. And the whole point of this is to bring either professionals in the mental health space, advocates of mental health, or those with lived experience. Because again, I think that it is so important to have conversations as related to real life, things that are happening in real life, and knowing that we're really truly not alone in this thing that we call life, and we can really shift into this place of hope and finding what's actually going to help soothe and reinvigorate our soul and really be on this mission to help others. So I'm going to introduce my guest for today, and then he'll share even a little bit more about himself. So, in the aftermath of a fight with depression and several challenges in his life and work as a police officer, he came close to committing suicide and only recognized that he needed help with the nudge from a supervisor who saw his humanity and knew he was struggling. Since then, he found hope in shifting his thinking and behavior towards a different way of being through a change in mindset. He is now driven by passion centered on the art and science of leadership, philosophy, and understanding human behavior. His work really focuses on helping others understand the importance of self-awareness, mental health and wellness, and professional growth through a challenge in mindset. So, without further ado, I am going to bring up Rick. Thank you so much for joining me today.
It's my pleasure, Kelly. I'm happy to be here.
Amazing. Well, I know I shared like a very brief section of your story, but can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself and your story?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So, as you mentioned, I was a police officer for a very long time. 20 years, 20 hard years, three different police agencies. I started my career in a small town outside of Atlanta, Smyrna, Georgia. It's where I kind of learned the trade. My dad was a police officer. He retired after 34 years, stayed in public safety for 14. So I've been around it all my life. He was also a volunteer firefighter. So I was always drawn to the services industry, public service industry. So I started my career in 1994. Changed police departments after getting married. Moved across country to Arizona. Loved Arizona. Decided to move back closer for family. I worked at Fairfax County, Virginia Police Department, and I left there after 15 years. Worked for software and did some other things. Finished my PhD in organizational leadership. I found a passion in my time when I experienced my own struggles, which was late 2003. kind of my purpose and passion in life was to give give management the tools and the ability to humanize people, essentially, because in law enforcement specifically, we tend to dehumanize people, and it's not something we just do. It's trauma informed. I mean, you go call to call to call, you are one trauma after another, and there's no way to release it. And I just had a very interesting conversation right before we got on about this very thing, and the fact that, all the things we try to do to mitigate that are unsuccessful, and end up leading to suicide. I've had a number of friends commit suicide, so I've been very fortunate in being able to share my story, which I was never able to do until about last year. I guess it's late last year. I was on a podcast and it came up, and I just talked about it. Um, and I struggle from mental health and depression, mostly anxiety. I have a family history of it, so kind of predisposed to it. But I've always been able to bury those things, right? Because that's what we're taught in law enforcement. You bury it, you don't worry about it. You go drink it off after the shift's over, and you talk about it, laugh about people's misfortunes, versus humanizing people instead of objectifying them. And I learned that difference in a very real way for myself, and coming out of that own personal struggle that I had took me a long time, and I'm still working on it. But it took me a good 10 years to settle with the ideas of how to do that and be able to be self-aware, and be able to talk about these things and share it with other people, because now I'm in a position where I can help people understand the self-awareness piece and what it means to humanize other people. And it's not like hug everybody. It's not about that. It's about treating people as people, because we're all the same at the same level. We are people. We are human beings at the end of the day. It doesn't matter our race, creed, culture, sexuality. It makes no difference. We're human beings at the end of the day. And yet we treat each other like we're better than other people or we're less than other people. And we're all the same.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing your story. And I know we'll probably dive a little bit more in there. But I think that there were a lot of really good points that you said too. And I myself, I just call everybody human because we are, right? Nobody is really, yes, we come from different backgrounds, we have different beliefs, we grew up in different areas, but really, truly, we are human. And one of the other things that you said is that, especially police officers, anybody in like first responders, in that type of field, oftentimes you go trauma to trauma to trauma to trauma. And a way to protect yourself, really, truly, it's your brain doing this naturally, is to disassociate yourself from those situations, which ultimately dehumanizes people and what you are going into every single day. But what I also love about what you do, which we'll also talk about, is that you focus more on the leadership, because that's where it really comes from. And it kind of, we says it rolls down the hill, right? Like it starts from the top and rolls down the hill. But I think that it's important, especially with your story, that one of your supervisors noticed that you were unwell, and you ultimately had to come to the place that you noticed that you were unwell to be able to go get help and ultimately leave being a police officer to really help and focus on helping others, so that your story didn't become the same story as other people's stories.
Yeah, and that's a great point too, and really that comes down to the lack of leadership development that exists in the public safety space. We just don't develop our people. We give them the skills and abilities to complete their job, and whatever that is. And even then, from a supervisory perspective, it's very limited. I mean, most agencies give you a week. Some people don't even allow. Like I know some agencies do like job shadowing ride-alongs, like you would be in a field training officer. Like when you come out of the academy as an officer, you go into field training for up to 3 months, some cases longer. As a supervisor, you're lucky if you get a week.
Mhm.
And part of that is you need to understand how to interact with people. You need to understand how to develop your own people, and be on the lookout for the things that are causing them to struggle. What are the performance? Is it a performance issue, or is it a mental health issue? Is it an issue at home? there's so many things, and it goes back to being human, and we all have challenges, hopes, dreams, problems, issues, and not that we need to know everybody's problems and issues, but we should be able to be a support mechanism for them to be able to do that. And what I love, and I love that I do now, is give supervisors the tools and the ability to develop their people and recognize those things. And like you said, my part of what saved my life essentially was a supervisor calling me out and saying, Rick, you're something's going on with you. I was getting in trouble. I was getting ready to get suspended, get my badge and gun taken away, which eventually happened. And just for some nonsense that I was doing, it wasn't like I wasn't committing any crimes or being unethical. It was just I wasn't following procedure. I wasn't doing the right things, and it was all systemic. I was going through a divorce. I was cheating on my ex-wife. I was having financial problems. I was drinking. I was doing all the things to suppress that trauma. Not that it's an excuse. It's not. It's just something that I started doing. And there's all kinds of other history behind that, but it just became part of me, and it took over my life. And I had a supervisor pull up to me car to car and said, "Hey, something's going on with you. Have you talked to anybody about this?" I'm like, "Nope," and I blew it off. And it wasn't until a couple weeks later, when I had tried to commit suicide, it realized I realized that I needed to do something. And to add on to that, and it's funny what you remember and what you don't remember about those times you're going through. And there were two other supervisors, and I remember them distinctly. Two captains had also recognized something after I tried to commit suicide. They recognized that I was struggling with some things and actually checked up on me and asked me about what's going on. One of them, I suffice to say, he saved my career and gave me another opportunity without, firing me, for just being dumb, and it saved my career. So I'm indebted to a lot of people who actually saw the humanity and the things I was going through and gave me an opportunity to succeed. And I just wish there was more of that.
Yeah, I mean, that is amazing that two supervisors, right, recognized and actually asked questions and got you to a place that you could get better. I know it probably was not just like, hey, by the way, and then you're better, right? That's not how it happens. But so the questions or the thoughts that are popping up into my head, because I know that in at least Colorado, where I live, there are certain counties that have really amazing support. They are very great about having mental health resources, both for their police officers and for anybody in the community. But then we also have pockets that they just like to do their own thing. And that's often where you hear a lot of the calls that don't necessarily go the right way, or when you're hearing about things that are happening that probably shouldn't happen. And I'm curious, and I don't know if there's any great way to put it, but you said originally that, I mean, even the leadership, right? Like they don't even go through as much training potentially as the officers that are on the front lines, right? And so you're put into this place that you're like, hey, by the way, you have all these people that now you have to lead, and you also have to be that, not therapist necessarily, but the sounding board. You have to make sure that you're keeping up with all the paperwork and all of the guidelines and rules and regulations and all the things, in addition to not necessarily having the full training of just leadership in general. So I don't know. My assumption is that is kind of the trend within police officers specifically.
Yeah, and when my entire academic career I spent studying leadership, and I love to study leadership. But there's two circles. There's management and there's leadership. And leadership is not a position, by the way. Leadership is an action, but it's an action you can take. Like management, we think of managing tasks. Leadership is leading people. and they cross over. Like there's two circles and they actually cross each other. And in the middle is the ideal position for in a management role, what you should be considering. You should be considering the things on the leadership side and also in the management tasks and the things that need to get done and guidance and direction to the mission of the organization. But in order to get there, you have to lead people. You have to understand that they're people. You have to understand that they have problems and they need to be developed. The most important role of any supervisor at any level is to develop the people below them, to help them gain ever increasing responsibility for their role in achieving the mission of the organization. That is the number one role that I tell any supervisor that I talk to. Listen, this is your main job. Your main job is to develop people below you and help them achieve success. Because by doing that, you're modeling behavior, you're gaining trust, you're showing that you care about them and giving them the opportunities to succeed. That goes a long way. And then not only that, but you get to know their work ethic. You get to see that the true and genuine selves most times of people, because it offers engagement. It builds self-accountability. Instead of holding people accountable, we develop accountable people. It drives, again, it's self-awareness. It helps, I become self-aware as a leader. I become self-aware as a manager leading people. And it also builds collaboration. It allows you to work together in ways. Now, we all can't get along, right? We all have people that drive us nuts, but at the same time, we have a mission to achieve. And, sometimes you've got to remember that they're people, and yeah, you may not like what they're doing, but you can still see them as a person and have those hard conversations. When you start the show, about having hard conversations. You can have hard conversations if you see another person as a person and don't just think about yourself in the situation. You think about them as you relate to them. And and again, it comes back to giving people the psychological safety to be able to speak up, to be able to say, hey, I have something to contribute. You care about me, Sarge, Captain, Lieutenant, Chief. Here's my thought. I don't know if it's right, but I just want to tell you what I'm seeing in the field. And to be recognized for that goes a long way. It actually goes a long way to helping them deal with the trauma too. And if they're struggling, they know they can go to somebody and be safe to say, I am struggling with this. They can see it. If you're looking, the supervisors can see it. But to match that, I'm coming to you and saying, Kelli, I'm having some trouble at home and I need some help. What resources do I have available to me? And the department may have wellness program, which are popping up all over, which is great. Peer team, which is also fantastic. But EAP has always been around. That's actually what I did. I went to EAP and I did it on my own. That first sergeant recommended I go, and I made the leap. It took me 3 times to find the right kind of counselor to talk to, because the first 2 weren't the greatest, but I eventually found the right counselor. I stuck with it, and it gave me the kind of the tools I needed to be successful, among other things that I was doing. But leadership is such a key part of this, and I can't understate that. It is, especially in law enforcement. We need people that we can trust to look up to say, I need help. And the only way you're going to do that is if you trust the people that are leading you. I can tell you, I can name 5 supervisors I had over 20 years that I can honestly say I would follow them into a burning building. And there's several that I could say that I would run the other way if we got in a gunfight.
Yeah. Oh gosh. So there were so many good things. I love that you said you have to, instead of holding people accountable, you have to build accountable people. I was like, right. And there's some other questions that are popping in my head, but first we're going to go to our quick first sponsored break. And then once we get back, I'm going to ask you a couple questions. So we'll be right back after this quick sponsored break.
1,917 people die daily from suicide globally.
I lost my middle sister, Kelli, to a completed suicide on February 20th, 2017.
How does Make Mental Health Matter save lives?
Number 1, awareness. My story, however, it isn't unique. I am a domestic violence survivor and a recovering addict. For 14 years, I was in active addiction, and because of Kelli and the work that she does and the opportunity to have my voice heard, I was able to stay clean and sober and have hit a year. I'm still here, and if it wasn't for Kelli answering my call the day that I thought I was going to take my life.
Number 2, conversation.
I'm curious, and I know that I've heard a lot in the BIPOC community. It is very hush-hush. It's like one of those things that you don't talk about. Like, you literally feel like it's not a conversation you can have. So can you talk a little bit more about that?
First, shout out to Kelli, because I'm glad that she asked the question. I researched you before I went on your show, and I saw how real and authentic you were, and I just appreciate the question because it is different, and we have to have tough, courageous conversations. So yes, I always say I'm a triple diversity threat. I'm a Black woman with multiple disabilities. Now, I'm not really a threat, but to other people, I may be, because people fear the unknown and what they're uncomfortable with.
Number 3, education.
Kelli's passionate commitment to mental health awareness is a beautiful thing. It's clear in her social media posts, it's clear in the resources that she puts together, and the activities that she provides, her collaboration with organizations, and the consistent way that she continues to deliver a message, encouraging people to understand that they can share openly and to break the stigma around mental health. Kelli's topics cover children and adults, talk about things that we can do as a community, things that we can do individually, and her website is packed with information and resources and all kinds of contacts that you can use to reach out, whether you're dealing with something yourself or you're looking to help somebody else who is struggling. I encourage you to check it out.
And like that, we're back. If you just happen to be joining us, thank you so much for watching the Make Mental Health Matter show. Rick and I are having a wonderful conversation about his story as a police officer, really how he has shifted into this role of helping leaders, especially within the service, first responders and police officers and service-based sector. That's probably not the right word, but I'm like, I gotta get my lingo down. I had some questions. So before we went to the break, we were starting to have the conversation really about leadership, how a supervisor can be that person that starts to notice when somebody that is, whether they're in the field or, I mean, this can really translate into any business, but really starts to notice that something's not right, whether it is those small changes or it's big changes. And there's lots of different ways that you could potentially help yourself or help others. You named a couple, like EAP, which employee assistant programs. They are really, really great if you are part of, whether it's government or corporate or a company that might have access to those. I know personally, when I was in corporate after my sister died by suicide, that's what I used. Also, I used EAP. And like you said, is that it took you a couple times to find a therapist that was actually beneficial for you, which is wonderful that you brought that up, because not necessarily the very first one that you find is going to be perfect for you. There are lots and lots of counselors and therapists and psychologists out there that you really have to be able to advocate for yourself to find the one that's going to support you in the way that you need to. And my story, I found a woman. I probably wouldn't have stuck with her after the free sessions, right? Like, it was okay for what I needed at that point in time. And then I actually shifted into community and another modality. And that's when I found neurolinguistic programming, which is just another type of therapy. And so you really have to like make those decisions to find the ones that are going to help you. There's also other type of employee programs, like peer programs you mentioned, which I think those are great too, whether it is inside a company, outside a company. There's recovery peer programs, there's mental health peer programs. Like there's so many different peer programs, which I think are really, really beneficial for people. And the question that was kind of bubbling up in my head is, because we were talking about how disassociated people in the first, like really like first responders, police officers, healthcare workers, right? They tend to disassociate themselves with their work ultimately to protect themselves because they see so much on a daily basis. But you also talked about how that tends to dehumanize people. So what I was curious about is like, how do we change that conversation? How do we start to humanize people? And then what does it look like after, like maybe it's every single day, like there's some sort of um thing that's implemented that people can like really process everything during the day versus just like going home and then bringing it back and going home and bringing it back. I don't know if you have ever thought about that, but that's the question that's popping into my head.
That's a great question. I think about it every day because I struggle with it every day. There's at the Arbinger Institute where I work now, a lot of this is focused around that, and it actually was a part of my healing journey, which I can talk about later. But our work centers around mindset, and not the traditional word mindset, but more about a way of being and showing up for other people, and a whole host of tools that helps you get there. But at the end of the day, all this starts with self-awareness. Whatever self-awareness tool you use or a program you use to help get you there. And it's funny you mentioned your therapist, that the one that I settled on, and I would still go see her if I knew where she was. Her name was Dr. Love. I'll never forget it. I sat down in that chair the first day and bawled my eyes out. But it was she was a tough love. It's so Quiver works, but tough love doctor, and she really was, and that's what I needed. And it's about that. It's about what you need at the time you need it. Like my old department, my one of my best friends, he's on the peer team, and they respond like that's their full-time job. And he was in a shooting a long time ago. He still suffers from trauma. He's still trying to figure it out, but they respond to officer involved shootings. When officers get in trouble or their family gets stranded in a different state for the flooding or whatever it is, that's what their job is. Their job is to help the family, the officers in those situations. But again, it comes back to, and I take it back, is it's about self-awareness. You've got to be self-aware enough to know what you need, how you need it, but some people aren't. And that's part of the process for supervisors to understand, to get to know their people, be curious about them. And because you asked about that too, is how does a supervisor recognize some of that stuff? It's about getting curious. It's like, I have so many questions about your history, Kelli. I would probably spend a whole hour asking you more questions than I wish I would have in our first encounter, but setting it up for another call, by the way. But it's being curious and just asking the questions and finding out what's going on. And some people might not talk, but at least it gives them a way of an opportunity to think, oh gosh, he sees something in me, or she sees something in me that I'm displaying, and maybe I need to figure this out. And carrying that around with you, like you said, a lot of our work that we do impacts people on a personal level first. Like the work that when I first read about Arbinger's work, it changed my life on a personal level, which was what I needed. I needed my personal life to get. It's never going to be fixed, but I needed my personal life to get back on track before I allowed my career to get back on track. And that's exactly what happened. I was able to adjust my efforts and do things differently over here in my life. I showed up at work completely different. I was a completely different person. I still had moments. I still have moments to this day. I still wake up and I get angry about something, and I think about this or I think about that, and then I try to center myself and use a technique or a tool, or just think about the situation and how I've contributed to it. Because I love stoicism. I love philosophy in general, but I practice the philosophy. I try to practice and live the philosophy, and it all comes back to what's in my control and what's out of my control. That's what I always center myself on is this situation in my control? What's in my control that I can actually resolve here? And it's my emotions and how I show up in that situation. And ultimately, instead of blaming other people, which is what our go-to is, oh, I did this because this guy over here, he, messed me over, or he's not answering his calls, or he called off sick tonight and I got to cover for him. It's all his fault. Instead of worrying about whose fault it is, do the job, do the thing you need to do, focus on what you can control. And you know what? It takes a lot of the burden off. It does for me when I start thinking that way. Those are some of the things I'm thinking about with your question. I'm not sure if that was helpful or not.
Yeah, no, that was definitely helpful. And I think about one tip or tool that I learned was I often say, is it about me or is it about them? And if it's about me, it's probably something internally that's triggering me and I probably need to work that out and figure it out. Or if it's about them, the best part or thing that I've learned is I can just let it go. And that's okay, which I used to hold on to things like, oh, it's about me, everything, like they're mad because of me and what I do and blah, blah, blah. And I had that story that like cycled over and over in my brain for so long. I mean, my background is corporate and I was a leader in corporate. And I oftentimes I'm like, well, my team is horrible because it's all my fault, right? Like that was my story that I told myself. But one of the things that I have learned is I can let it go because it's not about me. And that is so empowering. And I kind of want to translate that into even with police officers, those that are on the front lines that are having to go into these situations every single day because they also have to be very aware of their safety, right? Like, I think that's the biggest thing that whenever I talk to anybody specifically around certain events is that, hey, they have to be like, they're mindful of their safety because they have been in so many situations that may not be safe for them. And I mean, I couldn't even imagine like as a firefighter running into a burning building, right? Like that's not something that sounds fun to me. But they do it on a daily basis or going into a gunfight. Like I'm not going to jump in there and be like, hey, I want to be part of this, right? Like for me, that's just not my thing. But there are people that do that on a daily basis. So we also have to realize they have to keep their safety in mind. But I also love that you brought up is there are lots of teams, which I train about this as like the mobile mental health crisis team, right? They can come out and assist whenever there's a mental health challenge or crisis that's happening, which I think those two paired together, I'm hoping that helps to kind of humanize the situation. And I don't know if you know any different how that is benefiting the police force or not really having these peer or advocates going out with anybody in the field.
I think it's beneficial. I think anything above and beyond what we used to do, which was nothing, is beneficial. Again, I think it all starts with this first line supervisor or your direct supervisor and them being curious and actually leading the way they should be, showing up for people, developing their people, having conversations one-on-one with their people on a regular ongoing cadence. That is step one, period. It doesn't matter if you have a wellness program or not. That right there is a huge part of it. Because I go back to my story. If my sergeant had not said those things to me and got me thinking about it in the first place, who knows what would have happened? And I can't say one way or the other because I don't know. My state of mind was very flux at that time. But I can say for fact that behaviors and things that officers do, whether they use excessive force or they're doing things they shouldn't be doing, unethical, immoral, illegal, or just are they doing things out of policy, out of practice that just are not necessarily dehumanizing people, but joking inappropriately, doing the little things that are red flags, and them to see that is critical. So I always say that that's the number one. That is a supervisor's number one job, is to supervise, but to lead. Do those two things simultaneously where that cross is. But to your question, I think anything is helpful. I think I can tell you from my friend's perspective is there's clinicians on staff. Again, it goes back to what we was talking about earlier, is finding the right person, the right clinician to talk to. And a lot of the clinicians don't have any law enforcement experience. So it's hard for somebody in any public safety role, firefighter, EMS, police, doesn't matter. If you're not in my job, you don't understand my job, how are you going to tell me to fix myself? And that's that's what they think. They think they're trying to get fixed, and it's not about a fix. And you said something earlier too that I want to acknowledge, is for me as well, is my depression and everything else led me to to where I was in my situation. Is I thought I was a bad person because I wasn't living up to expectations that I had set for myself, or scripts I wrote for myself to say I should be this or I should be that because that's the way I grew up. My parents weren't like this, blah, 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 because I'm not a good person because I'm doing X, Y, and Z. It's not that I'm a bad person. Everybody makes mistakes. It comes back to being human. And when we realize that, and we see our own humanity, and a lot of this is we talk about recognizing others' humanity. We got to recognize our own. We matter just like everybody else. No better, no worse. We matter. In this, like the situation you mentioned, is sometimes you got to let it go because we matter. We can only do so much. We can control so much, and that's our actions and how we respond emotionally, physically, mentally to a situation that's presented to us. If we control, we can control, and we're doing the best we can do, that's the best we can do. And you know what? It's okay.
Yeah, I love that. We're going to go to our quick last sponsor break, but once we come back, we'll chat a little bit more. So we'll be right back after this quick sponsor break.
8 million people die by suicide in the world each year.
One person dies due to suicide every 40 seconds. Have you ever felt completely alone?
Like your life doesn't matter.
You are not alone. Call the National Suicide Lifeline at 988.
Hope and recovery is possible.
You can help too.
With only $19 a month, you help us save lives through mental health and suicide prevention education.
Scan the QR code or go to makementalhealthmatter.org to sign up as a warrior for mental health today.
Hi, I'm Ann Scotland, the host of Global Socialpreneurs. Join the experts, 12 p.m. EST on the Fresh Takes TV network for the best advice on social entrepreneurship. Join us here on E360 TV.
Hi there, my name is Angelique Kapoor and I am the host of Take the Lead, a consciousness movement with Angelique Kapoor. Join us on E360 TV every Monday at 6 p.m. Pacific Time, 9 p.m. Eastern. Take the Lead, a consciousness movement with Angelique Kapoor.
And like that, we're back again. So what you were talking about before we went to break is really this, it's not an idea, but it's really being consciously aware of others, being consciously aware of self. And I oftentimes talk about how we step on a plane and they tell us that we have to put our oxygen mask on first, right? Like that's really what we're talking about, is that you have to be self-aware. You have to also, you did say though that some people aren't, right? Some people don't know how to be that way. And I think that it does go back to like, what are your mindful practices? What are the things that you're trying to make yourself better, right? Like there's so many different types of modalities out there that you have to find the right one, just like a therapist, right? What works for you and what works for me or works for Rick may be very different for you, and that's okay. We also can really only control ourselves. We can't control anybody else. Although, even as parents, sometimes we feel like we can control our kids, or sometimes as supervisors, we feel like we can control our employees, but really, we can only control ourselves. And I think that when we start to shift our mindset and really understand that, it actually does take a lot of pressure off our shoulders, at least what I have experienced in the past. And it sounds like you also have. So I do want to shift a little bit into what you do now specifically. So share with the audience what you do now.
I do a couple different things, but my main role is I help state and local government. I working for Arbinger. It's a dream job for mine. Like I said, when I found Arbinger's work in 2003, as I was going through all this stuff, and that's where it kind of allowed me to see that I was the start of any problem that was going on in my life, and that's where I needed to focus my efforts. That's why I say it starts with self, and you beautifully encapsulated it there. But it starts with self, and that's really what our work is foundational on. It allows us, and I work in the state and local government practice, which includes public safety and law enforcement. And it's just it allows organizations to bring us in and help them be successful in this one piece of the puzzle of leadership development and people development too. It allows an opportunity for people to understand where they sit. How, do they understand the roles that they have in the organization, and what is their impact, more importantly, on those around them, who they report to, who reports to them, and their peers, so that everybody can get on the same page and work toward the same mission. And it drives those cultural aspects of an organization, like I said earlier, that self-accountability piece, the collaboration, the engagement, the inclusion, all the things, the drivers of organizational change and culture. And that's really what we focus on. So I help organizations, as they come in, and whether they're looking for an education training component to help their people understand these elements of mindset, and particularly around the outward mindset, but also for helping organizations develop their leaders and build this framework and idea as a part of their culture and their learning journey that they want to do. And it's a dream job for me, for sure, and it's something I never thought I'd be here. And it's something I absolutely love, because I get to talk about the idea of leadership development, this self-awareness piece, because it's so important. And I want to talk about one thing real quick and related to that. When we talk to law enforcement officers, all of these concepts and ideas that we teach and the things we're talking about, this self-awareness, this idea of what I can control and what I can't control, and situational awareness and officer safety. Those are the things that always get pushed back when we're talking to cops about these concepts. It's, well, I consider officer safety. Yeah, situational awareness, officer safety are critical. But think about how much more aware you will be of a situation, or be able to de-escalate a situation, when you are seeing a person as a human being, and you're not putting blinders on, because we start seeing people as objects or vehicles. I just want to get out of here. I don't have time for this. Or if I walk into a situation with those blinders on, I'm limiting my ability to see outside that purview and understand, okay, so what, not only am I going to show up differently to you and perhaps change that interaction, but I'm also not being aware of the surroundings as well as I could be. So there's that piece of it as well. And that's one of the things that, when we start talking to cops, like some of the special operations in various branches of the military as well, they say the same thing. It's, if you're sitting back and you're seeing a situation for what it is, and you're paying attention to the people in that situation, you're never going to be blinded by your own your own way of being and your self-focused nature. And if you step back and you look at everything and what's going on in that situation, it changes the entire interaction. So that's what I'm doing today. And I love this work. I love being able to take it to people and offer the ideas and the concepts. whether it resonates with one person and I'm able to help one person a day, that's all that matters to me. And whether I can help change an organization, which I've seen that transformation as a piece to the greater puzzle of leadership development. And it's just it's my passion and purpose for sure, and I get to do it every day, and I love it.
That's amazing. I actually just had so last month, my nonprofit organization we were part of, it was called A Rally for Hope, and it was down in Castle Rock, but it was put on by the Castle Rock police force. And when you just said that is like, when you take a step back and you look at it like as a whole, right? Like you can either be worried about or like intimidated to go to some of these events that maybe law enforcement puts on, or if you look from a backside. So I had my son, he's 9 years old, and all of the officers in, I don't know if it's all of Colorado, but I do know at least Castle Rock and Aurora, they all have trading cards, which is kind of fun. And their dogs also have trading cards. But when you were saying that, I was like, man, like when you step back and you look at people, right? Officers, anybody in law enforcement, public safety, sometimes the emotions that come up is intimidation, but you can also look from the backside of like, hey, we have these trading cards, like that humanizes them, the situation. I mean, the dogs have them too. So it's kind of fun to put those little spins on just even this conversation of how can law enforcement in general kind of change the conversation and almost gamify it in a way of, I want to collect all of their trading cards, right? Like, I don't know. For me, that was just something that popped in my head. I was like, it is pretty cool that my son could go around and get everybody's trading card, and it makes them not intimidating, right? Like they're humans and they are really great at their job. And I love the fact that we are trying to change the conversation, and they're putting on events specifically centered around mental health and suicide prevention. So I think that's just needed across the board.
Absolutely agree. And that's the hard part is people either wholly support the police. You can look at any poll you want to. They either wholly support the police in their community or they're strongly opposed to it. There doesn't seem to be any middle ground anymore. And it's then it depends on who owns the narrative. It's like anything else, right? But all we can do is control how we show up in our response to situations. And it doesn't matter what it doesn't really matter what the people think. Yes, we in law enforcement we serve the public to the best of our ability to protect and serve, and we still have to do that. Whether or not they like us, love us, hate us, praise us, it makes no difference. It's nice to hear the praise and the recognition, and it's nice to be able to do that. And but you showing up, think about it this way, and I'll leave you with this thought is, if you've ever been pulled over before by a police officer, what was that interaction like? Because you're going to remember it one or two ways. Either the officer was really cool with you, whether they gave you a ticket or not. It was how they showed up with you and how they were with you. If they were, Kelly said, driver's license, registration, proof of insurance. Yeah, the reason I stopped you today, you ran the traffic light back here. It was red. I'm going to go back and give you a ticket. If I'm robotic and I show up that way and I'm not engaged with you and not kind to you, or whether you're agnostic or not, it's how you show up. If you could present that human being to the other human being and have that moment of interaction, you're always going to remember that. And you're going to tell people how cool it was. I got this ticket from this officer. I was wrong. He was so nice or whatever, but you're going to remember, and you're going to tell twice as many people of how mean I was to you and how much of a jerk I was when I showed up to you than you are the nice version of it. And that's what we face. One cop in any, whether you're in Denver, Castle Rock, Aurora, you have one interaction. They're all the same to you. Mm-hmm. They're all the same to you. And that's the problem we face in law enforcement.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like it's such a broad conversation. We could totally talk forever about it. But just because I think there's so many important aspects to how we just change the narrative, right? Whether it's in law enforcement, public safety, or it's in a corporate environment or within another organization. But I am so glad that you were able to come on. What is the best place if somebody wants to find you or follow you? Where can they do that at?
I think the best place would be LinkedIn. I try to be on there quite often. So yeah, and there's the link. So yeah, please reach out to me if you have any questions or there's anything I can do to be helpful. I'm always responsive, and I try to post informative things around mental health and well-being, leadership development, law enforcement, public safety. But I have a passion for all those things and more. So.
And for those of you that are listening, it's linkedin.com/in/Richard, RICHARD, and BISTLINE if you want to follow him. And then also Arbinger, hopefully I said it right that time. It's ARBINGER.com if you want to find out more about the company that Rick works for specifically. Any last final thoughts that you want to share?
No, I appreciate what you do, Kelly, and I can't say enough about it's what's interesting is the shared experiences we all have as humans. You dealt with your situation with your sister. I dealt with the situation with myself, and I've had friends that commit suicide. Mental health is something we need to continue to talk about. We need to find better ways to achieve success in this field, because I think there's better things that we're missing in ways for people to resolve trauma and resolve the things that they face every single day. And I would just say to any person in a management role, either you're a positional or non-positional leader, somebody in the front line or somebody that's overseeing a group of people, be curious about the people that are around you. Pay close attention to them. You don't need to be in their space, but when somebody comes to work, when they're just, something's not right, whether they don't feel good or it's something going on, get curious about them. Ask them if they, they're going to appreciate it one way or another that you're asking about them. I would only leave you with that thought: is be curious about others, and even the family that you live with every single day. Get curious about them. They may be hiding something in plain sight you don't see. We all go through something. We're all dealing with something, and hearing it and getting the right questions to ask seems to help sometimes.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you.
I appreciate you. Thanks, Kelly.
All right, y'all. That was another amazing episode. Yes, I love get curious. I always train how to use our noticing skills. What are we noticing? How do we ask those questions? Some really great ways to get curious is using I statements. I noticed, I'm aware, I observed, I'm curious about, I wonder. Those are really great ways to start those conversations about getting curious and noticing things about others. No matter what you do, I want to notice that you come back next week. And we go live every single Monday at 5 p.m. Mountain Time on E360 TV, 5 a.m. and 5 p.m. on Dream Vision 7 Radio. No matter what, I will see you next week. Bye, y'all.